Alrighty, hello folks. So it's been a bit radio silence for me lately, especially on YouTube. I've posted some stuff to Instagram, some renders I made, stars, planets, and stuff a couple days ago. I think it was about a week ago. Anyways, one of the planet tutorials I made was, frankly, too long. I was bad at explaining it, and the results weren't great. Still better than a lot of the stuff you'll find on YouTube, but not great. There's a lack of good content for planets here, and it's kind of upsetting sometimes. And then the next one I made was, the results were a bit better, but it was a terrible tutorial for a multitude of reasons. Anyways, I figured I might try this again with proper tutorial, better narration. It'll still be long, but it will attract more. It'll definitely be better. That's what I'm trying to say. We're gonna be making something that's not like this, because this is very, very difficult to do, especially in Blender. But we'll get something pretty neat. Anyways, without further ado, let's get started. I have links to a lot of stuff in the description, and I might post some files on Patreon, $5 tier, after this video drops, so be on the lookout for that. Might be relevant to the tutorial. I'll have more information in the description. Pardon the plug, but money is good money, so anyways, let's get started by procuring some maps that we can use for these textures, because doing this procedurally will be a pain and the results won't be that great. So first, we're gonna look for some I first want to start out by saying there's two different styles that we can do this in. We can do this for up close shots where we don't need planetary scale maps, and we can do like full planet shots, and those will require like the eco-rectangular projections of the maps. So in order to get those, we can go to NASA Visible Earth and search blue marble, and we get sorry, that's the collection, and we get these, and we see there's one collection that has this eco-rectangular map. We can open that up, and then we can choose one of these. Not sure why I had those open. We can choose one of these to grab, and these provide you with a bunch of different options. So we can get a 294 by 196 image like that, or we could get this 5400 by 2700, or we could get 21600 by 1800. Or you can read, you know what I'm trying to say. And let's open this up in a new tab. You can see we get some pretty neat detail. This is usually enough for our purposes. Unfortunately, blue marble data is often wanting, because you can see stuff like this, but you can clean that up in Blender if we need to. And yeah, so that's a color map, and if we look up topography map, let's see, sorry. We can see this topography, and we can grab very high resolution pics of this the same way. By the way, I should note, we can see this 21,600 by 10,800, and we also have a bunch of these tiles, which if we open them up, we get basically a square image that is one that can be edited together to be there are 8 of these, and you can array them in a 4x2 grid, and these are basically like 4 times the resolution. quite impressive. But memory hug, definitely. You are not going to want to be using these in Blender because your renders will take forever to even load. But the detail is impressive. You can composite these together in Photoshop or GIMP at your leisure. But for now, I'm going to stick to the 2160 by 10, whatever. You get what I'm trying to say. This is all that we really need, and if we're going to do close-up shots, I'm going to show you how to grab those too in a second. So we can grab this, and you can literally just save image as and save it wherever you need. And you can also find, come on, ocean mask. Let's see. Lens mask. Shoot. I forgot where I found those before. My bad. I should have done this a little bit better. You can look up equal rectangular ocean mask. Yeah, that didn't work very well. Map. And image search may lead you to one of these. Okay, you know what? I'm not going to deal with that because I don't want to. And frankly, I should have done more research, but I mean, whatever. Moving on. I don't use these much anyways. You can easily reconstruct a mask of the ocean. That's pretty accurate for all intents and purposes, so let's look at how to grab specific areas of terrain. And also clouds, by the way. You can cloud equal rectangular blue marble clouds. You can find these two 21600 by 21600. I've composited these together before. I'll link this in the description along with an ocean map, just to save you guys some trouble. There's no real reason for having to do this, especially if I've already done it. Anyways, let's look at how to get a bit higher quality images of certain parts of the terrain. And we're going to start by let's start with SAS Planet. So you can go to this URL or just literally search in like SAS Planet. And it's just this first link. And download it. It's a zip file. It's not too hard. You guys know how to do this. Anyways, open it up and you'll be greeted by this. So this is what I use for terrain, and it's very good at doing terrain and pulling satellite data, and you can stitch a bunch of images together, stitch a bunch of tiles really, because it works in tiles if you can't already see that. So what you need to do if you want to grab a certain part of terrain, like let's say I want to grab some desert goodness, or where do I want to grab it from? Let's see. The United States of America, baby. Just sort of scanning for some good sites. Alrighty. Pardon, this is already kind of a disaster, eh? Alright, let's just grab something in from the Sahara So we can go to selection manager up in operations, rectangular selection, and just select an area that you want. Let's see. Make it roughly square, although tiny bit of stretching isn't terrible. And what you'll need to do is you need to download the tiles first. So don't go above 12 here, or else the data will become inconsistent. So in this zooms panel, you just want to select one layer, and that's 12 or 11 or 10 depending. You can see the resolution right here. So what you do is you go to download up here, you select 12 and then press start, and that's basically what you do, and wait for it to download. I'm not interested in doing that because I don't want to do much editing. So you got your maps downloaded, you close it. So once they're done, you close the window, and then you go operations, selection manager, just last selection. Then you go up to the stitch tab, and then make sure your zoom is set to 12. And by the way, ArcGIS imagery, up in maps here, ESRI, ArcGIS imagery is the one that you should be using, or you could be using. Bing also works. These are generally the best ones to go for because they're the most consistent. And you could choose the output, JPEG, PNG, BMP, whatever you need. No overlay layer, that's good. Although, I mean, I guess you could experiment with that. Never really needed it. And the projection, this Mercator WG-S84, that's the one that I generally use. It's usually the best for this sort of thing. And then press start, and it will stitch together for you, and I'll output in this file. And here is what I got. That was from, I did something, I believe, in Russia. And you can see very high res. This is a 20K one. It doesn't take that long. It's about 5 minutes to get all of these. But these are definitely good maps. Unfortunately, you can't get topography from this. You need to go to the Japan Aeronautical Space thing, JAXA, for that. And that's a whole process that I do not want to illustrate because it's a pain, and we've got better things to move on. And overall, topography generally isn't too important because often mountains are pretty shallow, and what happens above the land generally matters more than the land itself. I've had renders that look realistic that literally have no ground material. But that's how you get that. Let's source some cloud textures though, because cloud textures, you can't get them through here. I guess you could if you tried hard enough. Like, you can probably go in, I don't know. Yeah, cut out some of these, compose them together. That's pretty silly though. So what I use for cloud textures is earthexplorer.usgs.gov. You need to log into that so you can create an account. It's pretty simple. Nothing too crazy. But what we're going to use here is we're going to use when you go here, you'll see there's 4 tabs. One of them is datasets. And what you want to do is you want to go to Landsat, and then Landsat Collection 2 Level 1, and then Landsat 8, 9. And make sure that one is selected, and this will give you access to the Landsat data. This is from the Landsat satellites. And then under search criteria, you can create and you can select a certain area to get your data from. And you can find tiles as well. I generally don't prefer tiles. Basically what happens is certain satellites have, there's like a tiling thing that goes on for it to map out orbits of satellites. I don't generally use that because I don't really like it. It's clunky and it's weird. Anyways, if you select a polygon or circle, you can create a polygon or a circle, and then once you have it, I'm going to choose something like right here, and I'm going to apply, and then go down to results over here, and we can search it, and what we can do is let's see, show result controls, then we can either show all footprints, and this is basically the areas that are captured, and then this will show you what the data actually is. I generally don't like this. I like to go as it goes, and these are pretty high res. Like, you can scroll in and get a bunch of detail. Anyways, just I'm going to choose something. You generally want to choose over the ocean. That way you don't get any land mass in there. So I'm going to clear circle. Let's do something over here. Maybe we pull that over there, and then apply the results. You can also, by the way, you can also click on these, and you can pull up what they look like, and you can download them. You can look at them. These are low res. You need to download like the actual bands and stuff to get the real data, and by clicking on this, you can show what you're getting. Shoot, I really need to go out further in my oceans. Let's edit this again. Clear circle. Let's go out like over here. Results. So that's the same one that we were just looking at. We can show all footprints. So that's a bunch of data. Let's hide this. Let's see what this one is. Just a bunch of searching. Then clouds often have like a blue overlay. It's kind of weird, but I mean, you deal with it because the cloud data you get is often really good. So anyways, just find ones that you like. I'm going to spend a minute here just searching for a couple ones that I am interested in. I guess that one's probably a bit too far out. Yeah, you can't go in like the middle of the ocean for some reason. It doesn't really like that. But it's fine. Let's try over here. Apply results. By the way, there's like 900. And then there's a bunch of, like you can see, there's a bunch of clear water stuff, no land. That's sort of what we want. Like, there's a lot of data. So, all right, we've got this. Let's try and find one with a bit more. This is nice. You got some cirrocumulus action. And like, you could scroll all the way in. There's a ton of detail in these things, and these are excellent for cloud maps. Anyways, I quite like this one, although I'm going to look at... Actually, no, let's just download this one. So there's this download options tab. And let's see. If we click on product options, we can find a bunch of these bands and stuff. And this band 8 is panchromatic, so you're going to get a more accurate result for this. You can also see that it's a lot bigger. But if you want cloud images, this is basically the one to get. So you're gonna download this and let it download for a little bit. And while it's doing that, I'm gonna open up Blender and let's actually like get started doing this stuff. So let's move this back to the center. And let's start. So the first earth we're gonna make is pretty simple. It's gonna be just a regular earth, nothing too fancy, more for like the beginners. And then we're gonna slowly progress up in difficulty. And I realize what are we at? We're already a decent ways in. I don't know if OBS is gonna show that. But data collection is possibly the most important thing to know here. Because that's like what your earth is gonna look like. So I'm gonna start by subdividing this a bunch, just getting a smooth surface and turning it into a sphere. And this is pretty important. Make sure your dimensions are 2 and that you apply the scale. So you can't do that from there, but you can object, apply, scale, and boom. And don't forget to shade smooth. And don't forget to name this cube ground. So really what we need to shade a ground properly is, it's actually rather simple. Oh, we did not need to make a group out of that. So if you got node wrangler enabled, just Control T on this and open up your planet textures. So I've got them in here. Go rectangular. I'll put this ocean mask in there. It's pretty low res though, so I think it's actually probably better to just make it out of this color map. So it might take a little while to load that. Curious why this is taking so long. Download. If it doesn't end up working, whatever. I've got a bunch of cloud images saved on here. Sometimes it can be a bit finicky. Anyways, use generated coordinates and set this to sphere. We can see it projects nicely. Definitely very nice. But anyways, we got specular reflections on land. We don't want that. Well, let's start by adding some bumps to this. So I'm going to pull up the elevation map that I got and plugging that into displacement. The USGS thing often takes a little while to download. For some reason it's slower right now. I think it's sometimes off and on, but generally it works just fine. So unfortunately for this tutorial, it's acting up, it seems. But point of the matter is it works. Anyways, make sure you have a displacement there, or else it's going to be weird. Plug that into height. And make sure you scale it appropriately. Displacement on planets is quite small, so you just want a hint of it. Anyways, now is where the ocean mask comes in, and you can either use the mask that you got from the website, or you can. By the way, if it's slow to select these textures because they're big, you can just close that, and you won't have to deal with it. Anyways, it's also, I'd prefer to generally keep this interpolation to cubic, or else you get sort of weird square artifacts. I mean, you can see the low resness, possibly even more, but it's not squarey, which is nice. But anyways, we can use this map to create a rather decent approximation for an ocean mask. So we can do that by using color ramp. Oh, let's preview this. And just using constant and crushing these values down. Actually, I'm going to start by using linear, and then we can use color ramp to further crush it down. And if you want a really good visualization, what you can do is you can do vector math, multiply this by the mask. And you can then sort of see if you're cutting off land, like that's cutting off too much, but that is not cutting off enough. So just these sorts of things. Ease of life hacks. It's not going to be perfect, especially in these areas right here where it's pretty light. But for most places it works. And this, you're going to want to set this to constant and just make sure you're adjusting these enough. So yeah, that's sort of how that works, and what you can do is you can plug this into this, you can invert this basically by just making this one black and then the other one white, and plugging this into the specular. This is like the simple sort of beginner approach to the Earth, but it definitely works. And let's connect this up to the base color instead. And boom. Perfection. And if we set the world settings to black, then we can see sort of how this works. You can see the nice bump on these. Definitely good. And also we want to be using cycles and then GPU compute. That way we just get all this nice stuff going for us, and it looks really sweet. So that's the ground. Basically, it's nothing too special. So I said before, we're going to start on sort of the beginner's perspective. By the way, change the roughness as you see fit. We're going to start off on a more beginner perspective, beginner-friendly tutorial. So what we're going to do from here is we're going to make a simple atmosphere. So we're going to duplicate this object. I'm going to call this atmosphere. And duplicate the material, call this atmosphere. I'm going to delete all of this. And what I'm going to do from here, I'm going to add an input texture coordinate. Actually, let's first start by adding in a value. This is going to be atmosphere thickness. So I'm going to make this, I'm going to group this. I'm going to call this atmosphere thickness. We're going to add in a vector displacement. Not surface, pardon. Displacement. This is going to be our height. We're going to set mid-level to 0. We're going to set this to 0.01. Or you can go higher, you can go lower. This is generally a good point for atmospheres, I found. It's a little bit thicker than in real life, but generally in real life we also artificially thicken the atmosphere in our photos with stuff like fisheye lenses and stuff. So it balances itself out. But anyways, we want to go to this materials tab, go to settings, under displacement, select displacement only, and that is that. So next what we want to do is we want to go to color, shader, and then volume scatter. And oops, we don't want to do that just yet. Plug this into volume. And this is like an atmosphere in the most rudimentary form possible. And by the way, we want to go to sun here and set this to like 25 or so, and the angle to 0 or about 0.5 if you really want. We got a little bit of volume action going. And I'm going to try and make this sort of semi-organized. So what we're going to do here is we're going to sort of help ourselves out by making this node structure sort of conducive to further experimentation, which will happen later in this tutorial. But basically what we want to have now is we want to add in another node group for basically to control how our atmosphere operates. So what we're going to do is we're going to start without having any node group. And what we want to do is we want to add in a converter vector math. This vector math node does exactly what it says, by the way. It's a vector math node, which means that we're doing vector math. So what this length does, what makes it super interesting, is we return the length of a vector, and this texture coordinate node outputs a vector, and it's represented in 3D space. So what this length node does is it takes this vector and it performs the length operation on it. So it's going to return the length of this vector, and this is very useful because it makes a radially symmetric texture. So what happens when we do something like subtract 1 from it, is that when we plug this into the volume, let's multiply this a bit. Actually, let's multiply this by 100. Then color ramp and invert this. What we see we have is we've sort of tapered this off based on how far the atmosphere is from the center, or how far the location is from the center. And for reference, just a regular, this is what it looks like without that, this is what it looks like with it, right? Same density around here, different density up here. Anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to try and normalize, we're going to try and create this sort of parametric atmosphere computation. So what we need to do is we need to find a way to make the value of this function at the ground level be 0, and the value of the function at the top of the atmosphere Now remember, the thickness is 0.01. We need that to be 0. So what we need that to be 1. The value that the function outputs at the top of this atmosphere to be 1. How we do that is you subtract the radius of the planet, and the radius of the planet is 1 because our, kind of self-explanatory, the planet's scale is 1. So then we divide by the thickness of the atmosphere. And that gives us this value. So we see if we plug this into surface, that's 1 when our displacement is active, and it's 0 when our displacement isn't. Or that's, you can see it steadily increases in value as we go up. So now what we need to do is we need to figure out a way to map this to an atmosphere, because this doesn't look like an atmosphere, it looks like a cloud, right? So we need to find a density function that can make an atmosphere. And what we're going to do is, since atmospheres have an exponential decay, we can model this roughly by an exponential function. So I'm going to use a multiply node and multiply this by that, and then I'm going to duplicate this and in the power and make it a power node. And what this basically does is, this is now our atmosphere, right? It decays exponentially, which is pretty neat. One thing I like to do here is I like to clamp this, that way we don't get ridiculous stuff inside of the atmosphere. Although we generally don't see that. Actually, you know what? Let's unclamp this, and we'll do that later if we need to. Anyways, pretty neat, but it's very thin. This is a very thin atmosphere. Like if we plug this into our volume shader, right, it's barely visible. Like it's there, you can see it's there, but it's not very visible. So what we're going to do is we need to multiply it by a value to increase the density, right? Because this is going into our density output. Let's multiply it by a factor of 100. It's pretty dense, eh? Maybe we increase this a little bit to thin it out. That looks pretty good. Then we can assign a color to it. Boom, atmosphere. It's quite shoddy, but it's an atmosphere. Maybe we even increase it a little bit more, to like 250 or so. Oh, and the most important thing that I completely forgot, volume steps. Let's change this down pretty low, like 0.01. That'll help you a lot. It looks a lot better like that. And on top of this, what we can do is we can add in a volume absorption node to this. So if let's move this up a bit, and using shader, add shader, this will basically combine, not sure why it's up there, we'll basically combine the outputs of two shaders. So we're going to use a shader, volume absorption. We could plug this into there, although I like to add another multiply node to sort of help us control the strength of the effect. So I'm going to start by 1, and I'm just going to bring this down a little bit and make this a little bit more red. We can see how that changes things. Like this is a really sort of blue-red atmosphere. It looks pretty neat. Looks pretty neat. If we want a smoother atmosphere, we can do that. Like this looks sort of like what Earth would have. It's got a bunch of stuff. It's pretty thick. It's got some absorption. It's got this taper. It's got the red fall off. If we go into it, we get like the sunset effect. So it's, in all, it's pretty cool. That's sort of like the beginner planet, right? We can add clouds by just duplicating the sphere, duplicating the ground sphere. And duplicating this material. Call this clouds. Oh, I should add this to be clouds. And this ground material should not be just material, this should be ground. Always name your materials, guys. So this cloud sphere. We can keep the principled, but we can also delete most everything. Actually, we don't really need to delete everything else. What we can do is we can use our settings, displacement, and then choose displacement and bump. And what we can do is we can add another value. I'm going to group this again. This is just how I control my attributes. I'm going to call this cloud height. Oh. And then vector displacement. Set mid-level to 0, scale to 1. Cloud height, I'm going to set this to about 0.1. And we also have to multiply this by the atmosphere thickness because this is relative to the atmosphere, right? If our cloud height is going to be 0.1, it's going to be 10% of the way up the atmosphere. So math, multiply. And then we can go down and group here, atmosphere thickness. Oh, no, I don't want that. Multiply. Boom. Let's get rid of this. Actually, no, that's good. And then from here, we change it to 42K clouds. Give it a second to load. Takes a little while with these large maps. All right. So we got our 42K clouds map. Actually, sorry, we want to put this into scale. Height to be 1. And then we're going to duplicate this for reasons that will be made apparent later. And then we're going to do a shader mix shader. And mix between a shader transparent by the way, roughness should be set to 1. We can just add a little bit of specular to these clouds, and also make sure the subsurface radius is set to 1 and a tiny bit of subsurface, so like 0.001, and give it some time to update images. And we see we have some clouds. And then I'm going to plug this into here. I'm going to multiply by the atmosphere thickness. Then I'm going to multiply by another input value, which is going to be the cloud thickness. I'm going to group that. I'm also going to have that set at 0.1. Cloud thickness. And then plug this into, or actually I'm going to multiply, or I'm going to add 1. So what this is doing is it's displacing this out by this much, right, which is our cloud height, and that's additionally displacing it out by this much, which is the displacement from the texture. And so we set that to displacement and bump. We should be able to see a little bit of displacement. If we set the feature set to experimental and add a subdivision modifier and do adaptive subdiv, let it update images for a second. Yeah, large maps take a long time to update, just sort of on principle. Blender should operate better than this, but I mean, whatever. So I'm going to tab, let it update the mesh. And let's kill the subsurface a bit. You can see a little bit of displacement forming. If we maybe change this up to like 1, we can see a lot more. I think I configured this properly. Let's kill the atmosphere. Yo, what's going on here? Cloud thickness, atmosphere thickness. Oh, I don't need this. I'm stupid. And we can change this to cubic. And we can add that bit of subsurface back in. And actually, we, instead of wanting to multiply this by cloud height, multiply it by, or instead add the cloud height. It's a bit of a less obvious observation, but there it is. Yeah, that's quite exaggerated, isn't it? Just change this back to something reasonable like 0.0, 0.1. Add the atmosphere back in. And it's pretty neat. In fact, you could probably turn the subsurface off for faster rendering if you need. And it's a little beginner planet. Looks alright. Could be better, could be worse. But yeah, so that's sort of like the first step here. So let's get into this, just to sort of appease the less advanced audience. No shade, by the way, just these things can get complex pretty quickly, and if you aren't prepared, you can be very in over your head. So let's delete the clouds there. Hopefully, yeah, there we go, that downloaded. So let's open this up. It's going to open up as a TIFF. So we get all this lovely, lovely detail. And what I did in Blender is I made a little jiggy for, let's see, so download, visual effects, Blender, tools, computer just glitched out for a second there. Music went haywire. So, download. So this is the one I believe we just downloaded. I made this little thingy for making stuff seamless, which is quite nice. So what you can do is you can just, it's set up already so you can use it. And what you do from here is you basically just add a color ramp and then just adjust it so you clip out the ocean and just are left with the clouds. And make sure you get all the ocean out. Like, it's okay if you clip out a little bit of the clouds. Alright, like, that's not a huge deal. You can always add that stuff back in. Try not to, but it's not a huge deal. And then just set it to your render resolution that you want. Generally 10 to 12,000 for these images is good because that's about how high res they are after you augment them. And by the way, if you want proof that it is seamless, vector, let's add in a scale. Let's try and highlight it a bit. It's seamless, as you can see. It gets a little bit repetitive after a time, but that is the texture's fault, not mine. I will let you experiment with this to your heart's content. I just said I will put it in the description. I will do that. It's quite a useful tool I found because GIMP takes forever to do this sort of thing. But yeah, once you do this, you can use this as your tile. Anyways, let's close this. I've got like 15 or so tiles, these that I've been using. Let's go into the ground. We're starting to see some subdivision, so that's probably enough. So let's go on to sort of phase 2 of this thing, and this is like the most advanced method. So we've got this basic material, and I've put sort of timestamps in this video that you guys can use. And so basically, to catch everybody up who wasn't here, as if you're here, you better like know what you're doing in Blender. This is going to be some fun stuff. Made the ground. Yeah, I'm just doing a quick rundown. Made the ground. Now we made a simple atmosphere. You can copy this if you need. These values. I use attributes connected to node groups. These are the same thing, by the way. But so what we're going to need to do is just move this to the side. So this is going to be fun. This is going to be very fun. Like very, very fun. You guys are going to hate me. So what we have here is we have a situation where we have this very noisy volume where it doesn't need to be noisy. And this is going to hinder our render times. Like, I want to show you something. All right. Visual effects, planets. This is a render I did earlier today. This took 5 minutes. 5 minutes. It's noiseless, like completely so. So much detail in the clouds. Atmosphere, we got good. Ozone stuff coming, we got haze. 5 minutes. It's 4K. Right? You got clouds casting shadows on the atmosphere. Right? 5 minutes. This would take hours with Cycles' volumetric engine. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to make our own volumetric engine. We're going to make some volumetric light computation. It's going to be super fun, super tedious. Actually, it shouldn't be too bad. Shouldn't be too bad. we're gonna start by replicating this result, and then we're gonna add in more things for it, and show you how to optimize your performance with more detail. This is not for beginners, so in the comments, please don't be mad for me not showing key bindings or not explaining everything I do in detail. This is meant for people who want their results to be the next level. Hence the whole creating our own rendering engine thing. So, what to do next? One thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to have a master. We want to have a node group that basically stores the density of any given point, and these densities in these certain color channels as well. So not just a scalar value, but a vector density. So what I mean by that is we have in this volume scatter node, we have a color, then we have a density. And the density is scalar. But what we really need to do is we basically need to multiply the color by the density, and that's how we're going to control the volume extinction, right? Because within this node, you're basically multiplying color by density, and then using that to do the volume computations. But that using color and density separately is a bit easier to understand. Conceptually. But so what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to condense our density function into a node group. And by the way, I'm going to start by getting rid of this. And let's Control G. And we're going to get rid of this value. And we're just going to use a color mix RGB to give us a color output, and then we're just going to promptly delete it. And what we're going to call this one is extinction. Then we're going to duplicate this. Oh, that was one more. We're going to call this first one color. And we're going to start out by basically just plugging these two into the same one, because right now it'll work the same. And if we preview this, we get basically our density function. I'm going to call this density function. So this is just an emissive thing. Like, what's the deal here? So we plug color into a volume emission shader. So we're going to use a shader volume emission, just shader emission, and plug this into volume. And then we're going to add in a shader volume absorption. This is going to be the extinction amount of it, because remember, volumes what am I trying to say? Volumes also absorb light. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug this into density right now, and then use a shader, add shader. So what we're also going to want to do is, so volume absorption has a color as well. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to do a vector math, and we want to convert this into a scalar. So we're going to want to take the length of this, so length, that's going to go into the density, and then we're going to normalize the extinction amount to get the color. By the way, I want to show you what I'm doing when I'm doing that. So if I've got this, and let's say I want this to be blue, color mix RGB, multiply just by blue. If I want this to be blue, right, like I can get the density from this length function, the amount of stuff that has to pass through. And then if I use a normalized function on here, I can get the color, right? So this is going to be the color. This is the density at this point. So that's what's going on here. And this isn't immediately obvious, and it kind of takes some deduction to figure out why. But what we're going to need to do is subtract 1 from the color. Or sorry, subtract the color from 1. So 1 minus the color. That's what we're going to do with a mixed RGB. And the reason why is because, like, if we color a volume absorption, like blue, what we're really doing is we're absorbing the red light, right? So that means there's more like red light that's being, well, that means there's more red light that's being absorbed. So what we need to do, like, we're absorbing red light, for red and yellow light really, and that leaves us with just blue. But the color input that we have here is blue. So that doesn't really make sense. So that's why we need to invert it, right? So if we say, if we want to make a color, let's say we want to get this sort of same color. So we're going to subtract 1 from red, or actually like yellow in this case. Right, that's basically, this color is what's being absorbed. And that's sort of what the extinction output is going to be. So if we have like blue here, that's going to give us more red. Right, and because atmospheres emit blue light, that's what's going to be, right, like blue atmosphere, red sunset. Just this kind of interesting. That's sort of why we subtract 1, or subtract it from 1, why we like invert it. Just rather interesting. So yeah, so this is what we've got so far. We've got no lighting, nothing. So let's implement the lighting. So one thing that we need to build on here, and one thing I need to introduce, is the concept of using a certain value in multiple places. And the way we can do that, and the reason why I group this thing like atmosphere thickness, so, and it's just a value, is like if I want to update it here, it's going to update it here. Like, let's update this. It updates there, and it updates here. So we can use that universality to do multiple different things, and it creates an opportunity for us to vastly expand our capabilities with parametrically controlling stuff like this. And so let's get started with what we're going to be doing for the light computations. So what we need to do is we first need to identify the direction of the light. I'm going to call this light sun. We don't need that apostrophe. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go into our atmosphere, and we're going to add in a converter, combine XYZ. And this basically gives us a vector input that we can use. And we're going to use something called drivers. And drivers basically allow us to drive a certain value by the attribute of an object. So I'm going to choose a sun, and this is going to be X rotation. Right? Now, add driver for Y rotation. Now, add driver for Z rotation. Right, and this is going to give us a value with the total rotation of the sun vector, or the sun object that we're using to light the surface. And then what we do is, like, this is giving us the rotation vector that we need to, but we need to actually like rotate a vector by it. So we're going to use the vector rotate. I'm going to use this, or sorry, we're going to change this to Euler. So the center can remain at 0, 0, 0, and this rotation, but this rotation is going to be the combined XYZ. We're going to duplicate this, set this value to 0, 0, except for Z, which is going to be 1. And this is, we're going to group this and call this our light direction group. So what this does is it returns a vector that is the light direction, the rotation of our sun, and we can see this changes as we rotate it. This is going to be super useful. So the next thing we need to do, I'm not actually going to do it because it's just so tedious. I'm just going to import this, and I'll give you guys the function in the description. It's a sphere intersection function. It's a super cool function. And I'll explain why we need it in a second. So I'm going to append this from I think I can append it from here. Going down, there we go. So this sphere chord function, I'm going to call this sphere, I'm going to call this actually RSIF. What does that mean? That stands for ray sphere intersection function. So this is a super cool function. So let's show you guys what this actually does. So if we get an input geometry, we go down to this incoming vector. What this vector output is this shows you the direction of the ray that is coming, that is intersecting with the sphere. Right? So if we plug this into the direction, and we use a node called the vector transform node, we set this to point, camera, world, and change this to 0. This will give us the position of our camera, by the way, as well, right? So to move around, we use this as the position. Let's look at the output of this. Pardon, we need to look at that. This is kind of neat. What we've done is we've basically embedded this. Actually, let's go to vec close. That's going to look a bit easier. What we've done is we've created this smaller sphere inside of this larger sphere. It's just on the surface, really. What this is it's an intersection function, right? So it gives us an output of where a ray, rays are characterized by their start position and their direction, which is what this is, the position and the direction. And it shows us an intersection with a sphere. We can change the radius here. Shows us an intersection with a sphere. You can see like we made one that's a lot bigger than just this neat sort of thing. that's showing us the back of it. It shows us the intersection point between the ray and the sphere. So what this allows us to do is it allows us to basically define intersection points with the ends of the atmosphere, given a certain direction. And that direction is going to be this light direction. This is showing us the endpoint, because if we describe, like, let's look up when we need a volume computation, let's see if we can find it. GPU gems atmosphere. This is an article that was done on atmospheric scattering in real time. What we do to compute volumes is we take a camera position. We define the intersection at point A and point B, and this is what we use for the intersection, the RSIF function, the ray sphere intersection function. And then we compute the lighting at each of these points between it, right? And we use this ray sphere intersection function to define where we exit the atmosphere, exit the volume. And then we do a computation of how much stuff we need to pass through from there to get the light value at this certain point, and then we multiply just the density value by the light value. Pretty neat. So that's enough rambling for that. Let's actually implement this. So what we need to do for the position, I'm just gonna delete these because we don't need these. We're literally just gonna use this object. And then this direction, we're gonna use the light direction. Oh. That's gonna be the direction, because we wanna show the output position that we need. We need to find the position at which we exit the sphere. And since we're marching towards the sun, remember, right? Like, that's where our light's coming from. So we need to figure out how much stuff is between the sun and us. By the way, Blender's volume emission thing already takes care of marching directly through the atmosphere. We're really just computing light calculations right here. Like, we're making our own rendering engine, essentially. What we need to do is we got like this density here, and then we need to just light it properly. That's what we're focusing on right now. So, ray sphere intersection function, we need to define the output. And that is going to be, we're going to add in a converter math. We're going to add the radius of the planet to the thickness of the atmosphere. Right, because that's the bounding, essentially like bounding sphere of the atmosphere. That's the radius of it, 1.01 right now, since we have an atmosphere thickness of 0.01. So what we get if we, like, this looks a little bit weird. It is a little bit weird. It's a bit offset. This is showing us the exit point of the atmosphere. And by the way, when we're looking at, so there are two things that we're looking at here, the vector close and the vector far. And what these are is, like, when we pass through a sphere, it's an enclosed object. So we hit it at 2 points, the first surface and then the second surface. And the close one, that's the first surface, right? But here is the second surface, and when we're inside the sphere, we need to figure out the exit point, and that's the second surface. That's why we need that, the second intersection point, because that's when we exit the sphere, right? First intersection point when we're inside the sphere is just where the camera is at. That's how I've got this function configured. It's actually a decently sized function. Okay, so what do we do with this? This probably makes no sense right now. I assure you it will in a little bit. But what we're going to need to do with this is we need to figure out the amount of distance we need to travel. And we're going to use this for our light computations to basically march along a certain path. So we're going to do vector math. We're going to subtract the vec close from the vec far. And this is pretty neat. Let's plug this into the volume. So what do we have going on here? Why is this looking like this? And what happens is because the light's coming from over here, from the top right, the points inside here have to move all the way through all this atmosphere to get to the top over there. Meanwhile, the points up in this hemisphere don't have to move so far. And we can see that there's still a value there. Like if we use a scale, like we can still see that there's some distance they have to travel through. Really neat. So this is going to be called our step function, essentially. And we're going to need to use this for lighting steps. So we need to create an optical depth computation for essentially how much light we need to pass, how much light passes through the atmosphere and gets to a certain point. And that's what we're going to be using for how we shade our atmosphere. So this is going to be the step input for it. And that's basically going to tell it how far to step in this direction. This contains both the length of the step and the direction. That's what this pink color is, right? If we rotate the sun, right, it's going to change. That's what we did the entire thing for the light direction on. I'm really doing my best to explain this part, and it's a very complicated concept. So next thing we need to do is we need to add in some light samples. So I'm going to add in I'm just going to duplicate this a couple times. Then, boom. We got a node group. I'm going to call this the light sample pack. Fun. So what we need to do for this computation is, remember, we're doing this step of this vector. We're computing the light at a certain point, which means we're marching towards the sun, marching towards the light source. And we need to measure the values of this. We need to find a way to measure how much shit we're passing through. Like what's the amount of molecules we're passing through to get from point A to out of the atmosphere? How much stuff does the light have to pass through, and how much light is diffracted away? So what we're going to need to do, and let's delete this in favor of a color output. So this is going to be our lighting output. And then we're going to essentially just multiply the emission, this color, by this light output. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to fill this with a couple samples. So we've got this step vector in here, and I'm going to appropriately name this, so I'm going to call this step vector. And then I'm going to add in another. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to call this first one position. So we're going to take this position, let's put that in there. This position is just going to be the object output. We're going to take this position and we're going to march it based on a step vector a little bit each time, and we're going to measure the density at that certain point. We're going to basically add that up. So I'm going to add in some math, Control G. I'm going to call this light sample. And let's delete this and delete the inputs. So let's add in a converter vector math. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do something basically just iterative groups. So this is going to be, which means we're going to basically have a string of node groups. And what those do is they basically build upon each other. So the vector input of this, so I'm going to call this position input. This is a really kind of good demonstration of how this works. So the position input, like if we take this vector, let's just add in this light sample. So, I mean, this says light sample, but it doesn't really do anything. So let's say we take this function, and this function is just an adding function. So it adds this yellow color to it a bit each time. It's actually, so what we can do is we take this position function and we can just string this along, and it gets brighter a little bit each time according to what happens inside the function. And that's what we're going to be using. But also what happens is we can take this position, and in this context it's going to be location, but in this example it's not going to be anything. So, or this concept, it's going to, in context it's going to be the step vector. So step vector, and if we pass that into the output, and we can duplicate this and just plug that into there, because it's going to be a constant. So we take this position, we take this step vector. What we can do is we can pass this step vector into the step vector input. We can duplicate this a couple times. Oh. And we can basically ensure that our constants are migrated properly to the other node groups, right? And we end up getting these chains that look like that. Now this doesn't really do much right now, but it can and it will when we implement this as an actual light sample. So we got position and step vector. And I also add in another scalar value, so I'm going to add in a math node. And this value is going to be called counter. And this is going to operate just like we showed in the example. It's going to add a certain value to it. I'm going to add 0.125 because I intend to add 8 light samples, so I want this to start at 0 and end up at 1. And I'll just make our computations a little bit easier. And let's start this at 0. Although we can actually, what we're actually going to do is, since we want to do a progressive path tracing sort of render for this, and we want to get a bunch of we want to make sure that we're sort of using samples to our advantage. We're going to use a texture white noise, use position as the input. That will basically allow us to have a bit of progressive rendering to this, and we, by the way, don't need to multiply this by, well, we need to multiply this by 0.125. That way we aren't like completely overshooting it. We just want to migrate. We want to use this to interpolate between sample 1 and sample 2. But let's see what we need to do from this. I think this is all we need to do, pass in as the inputs and outputs. So what we're going to do is we're going to string together 8 of these light samples. I made an oopsie. I could have duplicated. Sorry, this gets sometimes tedious, especially when you have like 20. Dude, why is my mouse is behaving weirdly? You can just duplicate all of these. Smooth that out, and then just connect these because those are already connected. Yeah, sometimes I've had to do this, and each one of them had like 20 inputs, and it was just painful. Anyways, fun. So what we're going to need to do is, so the step vector, since we have 8 samples, we want to march it to the desired point, the intersection point with the atmosphere, but we don't want to march it past it. And if we're marching it by the entire step vector all at once, we're going to overshoot it by 800%. So what we need to do is we need to scale it down by 0.125. That's basically going to mean that we're marching at 8 samples, and it's basically just eventually it's like the counter, it goes up to 1 or around there. So actually, my bad, I'm doing this not so great. So, well, actually, you know what? No, this is fine for now. This is fine for now. We'll introduce more variations in the next sort of section. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to actually, I am stupid. So we're going to need to add in our density function because we need to actually sample this, right? And that's not what we need. So our density function, got it right there. And we need to sample we need to sample just the extinction, actually, this one. So we're going to take the extinction, and we're going to multiply this by the length of the step. Oh, we should actually probably should actually do that before there. We don't want to step before we take the, we don't want to step before we take the sample, because that basically means, well, we don't want to step too much, I mean, before we take the sample, because that basically means that we're going to lose some data at the end, because we're going to be already at the intersection point, and the value of that should be ideally 0. So we're going to take the extinction, we're going to use a converter, vector math, multiply by the length of the step. Because remember, the amount of stuff we're passing through is equal to the density multiplied by how much distance we're traveling through. It's like an integral, basically. It's like approximating an integral. Think about it like that. Except the functions are a bit less defined, a little bit less well defined. So we're going to take the length of this and multiply it by that. And then we're going to want to make sure we're iterating upon this. So we're going to vector math add And there we go. And we start with 0, so that's fine. And just connect all these up. And then at the output, we're going to take this extinction. Actually, sorry, we're going to take this extinction, and we can't directly put it out there because this is just a measure of how much stuff we're passing through. What we need to do is we need to convert this to lighting data, and since volumetric lighting is basically a function of an inverse exponential function of how much stuff you're passing through, we need to actually implement that. So I'm going to use a separate x by z and a combine xyz. I swear I use textures by the hell. And then converter math, power, and just a bunch of these. One of these for each one, because we remember it's an exponential decay essentially of how much light gets to there. And that is that. That is, I believe, everything that we need to get this basic functionality going. So let's see if this works. Let's delete that. Aha. And like magic, it works. So if we're... So color, mix RGB. If we test this with, like we see, it's a basically noiseless volume. So if we test this with some textures, or not textures, just some colors. Boom. That's with just a simple blue. We can, like, yay, atmosphere, right? And it's perfectly noiseless and all that other stuff. Like, it's not super good, but this is just basic atmospheric scattering, right? So let's, now that we've got this framework built up, let's define a more precise, like, so this is essentially going to serve as our volumetric rendering computation. And what we do with the atmosphere, the density function, is just going to be inside this node. So if we want to make this more dense or less dense, that happens in here. Now what I like to do is I like to completely divorce the color of the atmosphere from the extinction of the atmosphere, and that just gives us more control. So what I'm going to add here, and by the way, keep these parameters, not the light direction because that's dependent on the sun. I like to keep these parameters like the atmosphere thickness and the cloud height, cloud thickness. I like to keep these down here so I have easy access to them. Let's see if there are any I'm forgetting. It looks like that's about it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to separate these color and extinctions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an input RGB, and this is going to be the color of the atmosphere. So I'm going to Control G. This is going to be an atmosphere. Actually, I'm going to call this blue sky color. And that is going to be multiplied by the density through vector math. Where's multiply? Alright, that is going to be multiplied through there. And that means we can basically control the color like that, and we don't have to worry about the extinction. And then I'm going to duplicate this multiply. Let's move that right there, and I'm gonna use another RGB, and I'm gonna call this red sky color. And I'm gonna use the 1 minus trick here again because this is gonna be an absorption thing. So like if I want red absorption, like the intuitive definition of red absorption, I'm not going to want this, right? So I'm going to use color, mix RGB, and subtract. There we go. Subtract. There we go. And we see that this behaves like absorption should, and it's pretty sweet. And like boom, there you go. So we've got those two. These are pretty nice. So let's add a bit more functionality to this. So we can control, I'm going to set this to 100 because that's a really good value I found. So we can control precisely through these attributes. Like let's add in a value. We're going to group that, and I'm going to call this the blue sky density. I don't need that camel case there. Blue sky density. Blue sky density. There we go. Multiply by that. I set this to like 1. And on top of that, after we split these channels, we can add in another parameter and call this red sky density. Or red sky decay intensity. And if you see this as 0, like we can change that. And then what I also like to do is I also like to add in a sort of global extinction parameter. And the reason why I like to do that is because it's good to have sort of global parameters that can, or yeah, so like a master extinction parameter really. Let's change this to like 0.01. That's bothering me a little bit. And before I forget, let's add these to blue sky color, blue sky density, red sky color, and then red sky decay intensity. There we go. You can see sort of what happens when I do that. Pretty neat. And then I said before, I'm gonna add in a global extinction, or like a master extinction parameter. So I'm gonna multiply this by another value and call this atmosphere extinction coefficient. And let's move that over here. And we can use this to do sort of similar things, but it'll affect more than just the red sky decay. Like it'll affect cloud extinction and other sorts of things. Anyways, so that's sort of like step 1, right? Like this is a basic atmosphere. It doesn't look especially great. We can do things like that. Like we can change these values to what we want, and we can end up with a pretty decent atmosphere. Actually, pardon this. No, I did not mean to do that there. We need to... That would be something we do in the light sample pack. Yeah. We're going to multiply the extinction there. That way we... it's sort of independent of the absorption. So we can see through it clearer, but it's behaving like there's more stuff in there. Group. Atmosphere extinction coefficient. Boom. And you can see what happens when we kind of abuse that. But yeah, just a fancy little thing. So we've got the technical sort of rendering engine aspect of this down, but at the same time, we have we don't have a very good looking atmosphere. Like, I mean, it looks alright. It functions as an atmosphere, but it doesn't look good, if you know what I mean. Like, it looks very generic. It doesn't have many features. Like, let's... Like, it looks kind of plain. Our sunsets aren't that great. And the reason why is we're losing a ton of... We aren't taking into account a ton of details that most atmospheres have. And I'm not even talking about clouds, but mist scattering and haze are just a couple one of them. An ozone layer. Ozone layer is really actually kind of important to the look of it. So let's start with the haze aspect of this, because that's kind of important. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna duplicate this section, actually this entire section. This is basically our base exponential function. We're just gonna move that directly above there. Then we're gonna change this to a value, and this is gonna be our haze density. Density. And we're also gonna, since haze is independent of atmosphere thickness, well, it's dependent on it, but it's separate. We're gonna divide this by another parameter we're gonna call haze thickness. There we go. I'm going to leave that at about 0.3, maybe 0.4, or actually 0.5. And this is going to be a separate haze layer. So what we're going to do here is we can basically add this to our color. So vector math, add, so I'm going to call this, no. I'm going to call this haze. Let's add in, converter vector math. This is going to be multiply. This is just going to be our haze color, so I'm going to use RGB. Control G. And we're just going to do white for now, because that's generally what happens. Haze color. What is with my typing? Haze color. That's what we're going to do there. Let's increase this to like 2. There's some haze. Nice haze. Haze also has an element of extinction to it, so let's not forget that. So we're just gonna add this. We don't need the color for it because it's generally rather monochromatic. But this is what our haze looks like. Then I'm also gonna add in another attribute. This is just going to be a scalar, so I'm just going to call this one haze brightness. And if we set this to 1, we can turn it all the way up. I generally like to have it at 1 or 2. But yeah, this just adds an element of haziness to the atmosphere that generally is lacking. And we can actually see this like inside of the atmosphere. It makes it look pretty neat. But it's easy to overdo this, so keep it low generally. But yeah, there's the haze aspect of it. Next thing. This is going to be fun. So the assumption, I'm going to assume the viewer has skills practicing implementing equations. So I want you to pause this video and this is the phase function for anisotropy. So this explains what it does. And G is the anisotropic input. And this is the equation to transform G. By the way, theta is the angle between the sun and the ray direction. So I'm going to import the node group I already have, and I'll show you the nodes, by the way. But it's on you to make the node group. So I'm going to file, append, and node tree. Nope. Node tree, anisotropy scalar. Let's make sure this is the right one. Group, anisotropy scalar. Yep. So here are the nodes. I'm going to change this to just light direction. It was tied to the sun of the original when I imported it from. This takes an anisotropy, outputs, and then, well, outputs the coefficient. So just pause it here, write this down. This is just tedious and it takes a while, so I'm not going to show it there. But so this is going to be, I'm going to add another parameter, and basically this is just something we multiply by. So I'm going to add in another parameter I'm going to call this haze anisotropy. Haze anisotropy. That's what I'm gonna put in here. And it looks so lovely, honestly, when you see like sort of what this does, right? So you see the haze getting brighter and brighter. And by the way, we're only multiplying the color by this. We don't need to multiply anything else. So like it practically disappears over here, but it's very bright, very defined. Looks pretty good. Looks kind of like the sunset still looks pretty weird. Because of how like foggy it is and stuff. But yeah, there's the haze part of this. Let's move this well out of the way. Anyways, so there is haze. Wee. Don't you love how it's like it's real time, pretty much. It behaves, well, not quite real time, but it behaves like an atmosphere. Looks better than a lot of atmospheres you see just natively run in cycles. And it's noiseless. I forgot to delete this. That is not something we need. There we go. Next, ozone. This is pretty easy, to be honest. It's just an extinction thing. So we're only going to be modifying the extinction. So we're just going to duplicate this add node. And we're going to take this output here. We're going to add in a color ramp. I generally like to not be spline, sorry, not constant ease. We're going to take this color ramp from out of here, and that's basically just going to isolate the upper parts of the atmosphere where the ozone layer is. By the way, let's find out where this is. I found an excellent little graph about it. Yeah, here it is. This is a really neat little depiction of it. You can see it starts there and it sort of tapers off. So what we're doing is we're basically making sure it starts at somewhere, and then we're going to multiply it by a blue sky density and by 100. Let's do that, and then we're going to also multiply it by an additional ozone factor. So I'm going to do Control G, and then ozone amount. And then do another multiply here. And this is going to be for the color. And I'm going to input RGB, and this is going to be called ozone color. And then we're going to do the 1 minus thing because it's an extinction phenomena. Ah, come on. Connect this stupid thing. There we go. No, we don't want mix, we want subtract. Now let's add that. Let's change this up a little bit. Pardon, I meant instead of multiplying by that, we need to multiply by this. That's my bad. We see sort of the immediate effect that this actually has, and we can tune these values a little bit. Like we get this really sort of pronounced. Like if we look at Earth photos, that's like we see how it's kind of like desaturated up here, but it's very pronounced. The blue is very pronounced out there. And this gives us that effect. You can see that also. Where did I open my image? You can see that on here, right? Like it's pretty hazy over here, but it's actually very blue out there. And this gives you the actual atmosphere look and distinguishes the sort of fake looking atmospheres from the very realistic ones. I think this is probably good on the atmosphere, or at least mostly good. There's actually still one thing we need to do, and that is what we have here is a single bounce or a zero bounce volumetric material. We're simply marching towards the sun, and we don't care about any interactions with the molecules around it. Just sort of what happens between here and the sun. So we need to find a way to efficiently approximate that. And basically what that just entails is we're only going to be adding a little bit of what am I trying to say? Just adding a bit of artificially added light just in many places. So let me find a way to explain this better. So when we care about interactions with the molecules around it and the distribution of light inside the volume from volumetric sources, the end result will always end up being a little bit brighter than than if we didn't do that, right? Like if this was a regular volumetric material, like let's add in a shader volume scatter. Right? And so this is with zero volume bounces, and we can see it's noticeably lighter when we add a ridiculous amount. For reference, this is 0. Quite dark, a little bit darker. So we need to add that basically artificial light back. And the way we do that is like, it's a sphere and it's a rather consistent volume. So it's actually not too hard to sort of approximate that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a little mask thing that basically adds a little bit of volume back to the, adds a little bit of volumetric light back to the volume. I'm going to do that within this extinction function, or within this light function, because it is a lighting effect. So I'm going to take this position, and I'm going to use the step vector node group. So that's where's step vector, or sorry, we're going to use light direction. So I'm going to do a converter, converter vector math dot product to get basically the cosine of the angle between the, I'm going to vector math normalize. That way we basically get the general direction instead of the actual position. Not multiply, normalize. And that's going to give us this, right? Because it returns the cosine of the angle between the this vector and this vector. One of them being the position, one of them being the light direction. And we're going to basically manipulate this into a vector that is going to give us a good function for adding the light where we need it to. So I'm going to use converter, math, and then arc cosine. That's going to give us this, which is going to directly be the angle between the these two vectors. Because remember, this is the cosine of that vector. This is the arc cosine. So the cosine of the arc cosine is the angle, or an arc cosine of the cosine is the angle. And then I'm going to use math, multiplication, multiply, power, I'm just using this to create a little mask, and we're going to use an exponential function right there. So now we just need to manipulate this basically into sort of the desired amount of light that we want to have scattered. So let's move that down there. We can power just these little bits of control, pretty helpful. And then we can use a converter, converter vector math, add this to there. And we need to duplicate or multiply, that way we can control how much of this is added. So let's move back into this. So what we'll notice here is, like, it's not a very apparent difference, but there's a slight, like, it looks different. It adds in a bit more sort of pop. And if we look at the sunsets, like, let's go in here. Let's actually I forgot one thing. We need to multiply this by the atmosphere color. Yeah, blue sky color. And then let's, just for a little bit of control, we can add in a color, hue, saturation, and just turn the saturation a little bit down. So, like, if we use our sunsets as an example, like, look at what happens here. This is a very nice little sunset, and we can use these to sort of control, like, we know what we're looking for. Like, this doesn't look like a really good sunset because there's not enough blue, really. But this adds a certain, it improves the sunsets, and that's sort of what we're looking for here. And we can see the changes. Like, this is without it, this is with it, this is with it. But it just adds that extra pop. I'm sorry, I've been quite vague about this stuff. I'm not a very good explainer for these sorts of things, but it definitely, like, if we want a realistic atmosphere, it should ideally be realistic from wherever. Whether it be inside or outside. So, we're missing one thing, and that's quite obviously the clouds. So, let's add them. We don't need this TMP viewer. Let's get rid of that. Now, there's a couple ways to add clouds. I'm going to show you the way that's most efficient performance-wise. And that is to use them in their own using their own object. So let's get started. So we need to create a part of this density group for clouds. So let's first start by duplicating this atmosphere, and that will duplicate we duplicate the material. This is going to be clouds. Let's call this clouds volumetric. This is going to be clouds. So we've got a bit of a difficult task here. So what we need to do is we need to make a domain for in order to have peak efficiency for these clouds. We don't want to, like, clouds require a lot more detail than the rest of the atmosphere. So we're going to be using in here, and so each under settings, just under where displacement is, you see the second volume step rate. We're going to set to like 0.2025 for the clouds, and that's a lot more detail than the atmosphere needs. So we want to keep the atmosphere running quickly, but also the clouds very detailed. And in order to keep the atmosphere running quickly, we need to make a cloud layer that only, like, the volume boundaries need to only be we need to have the volume only be where the clouds are. So we need to have a little bit of a fancier displacement setup. So the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out, we've got our cloud height, we got our cloud's thickness, we need to figure out where the outside of the clouds are, and then we need to do the inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect this. Oh, sorry. That was a very vague statement. We need to make a volume boundary for the outside of the clouds and then a volume boundary for the inside of the clouds. And what that's going to entail is we need to go into this clouds mesh in edit mode, duplicate the sphere, so that's Shift D, and then mesh normals flip. We can see, like, we got two different spheres. So what we need to do here is we've got a displacement function that we need to do, and we need to find a way to both separate these two spheres based on our cloud thickness. So that's going to be pretty easy. So we've got our displacement. This displaces based on the normals, the default normals of the object. So we need to basically separate the outside sphere from the inside sphere. So I'm going to do vector, math, multiply, then group cloud thickness, right? Because remember, this is all relative to the atmosphere thickness, and then divide by 2, or just multiply by 0.05 or 0.5. That's because, remember, we're displacing the outside and the inside, not just the outside. So yeah, so that separates these two spheres. Now we need to basically displace all of it from the surface, and what we're going to do is we're going to use a vector math add, and then add in a vector math multiply. Actually, sorry, scale. And we're going to use the object output, and then, sorry, vector math normalize. So we need to normalize this object output. That way we basically just get the direction it is in, not the magnitude of the vector, how far away it is from the center. So we've got normalized. That's going to be the vector here, and then the scale, it's going to be its atmosphere thickness. Well, actually, so we're going to need this multiply, or we're going to need a multiply node. We're going to multiply this. Sorry, we're gonna add this to, and duplicate this. Cloud height instead of cloud thickness. So we're displacing out by the cloud height, and then we're adding half of the cloud thickness to that because we need to move it a little bit more and then displace the inner sphere in a bit, and that's going to end up sort of equalizing out. And we're going to scale this, and that should be our displacement. And if we plug in a shader emission to our volume, and we up the strength a lot, we see when we zoom in so you get this sphere where we have volume. Actually, let's check our cloud height and cloud thickness. So cloud thickness is 0.1, cloud height is 0.1. We see this is displaced a bit off the ground, and it's also a bit thick. And if we change this to like 0.02, like it's a lot thinner. All right. There, it's a lot thicker. We can move this up and down. Right? Pretty neat. Anyways, this is our cloud layer. So let's add in a part of this density function that is just for clouds, and we're gonna have our, we aren't gonna have our own extinction per se. Actually, we will. Pardon me. Let's plug this into volume just to see how it looks. Kind of silly. You don't need that much detail. Yeah, there we can see we're only getting the atmosphere in that tiny part. Kind of fun. Okay, so let's add in clouds, eh? So remember, before in the tutorial you got a bunch of or not a bunch, you got a couple cloud images from either if you're doing eco-rectangular, you got it from what was it, Visible Earth, or if you got close-up images, you got them from Earth Explorer, right? Then if you did that second route, you made them seamless using the little thingy that I made for you and then exported them, and now you can use them on your plant. So let's actually do that. So what we got here is we've got to make a cloud layer. And that's actually pretty simple, so I'm going to just add in a group input. And the most basicest of basic cloud layers are just, you're going to add in your texture, wherever it is, image texture. Open it up. Where it is, textures models. Actually, no, textures, planets, Earth, nope, not equal rectangular. I'm gonna go for my, give it a second. This is probably my favorite cloud image. I have My friend Omag made this. Friend Ole. Very skilled Terragen artist, actually. He taught me a lot of what I know about sourcing data. So the most basic cloud setup is you basically just use a texture and input it into the density. So like let's do that. So we're gonna add this to there, add this into there. And converter math, multiply. Multiply it by some ridiculous amount. And you'll eventually see it. Still need to plug it in there. And like, boom, clouds. Right? Like, that's pretty neat. Maybe we add in a bit more. And even better clouds. Right? Like, unfortunately, these clouds are rather lackluster. For a couple reasons, mainly. But let's configure our scene so we can see them a bit better. Let's go. Actually, right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this surface detail. And we're going to rotate the sun so we can I'm just going to do it in here. So this, now it should be properly normalized, or not properly normalized, properly oriented. So, we've got a slight bit of an issue here. We've got these clouds, but they aren't detailed at all. Like the volume steps are, like, they're quite big. They aren't very good. So how do we fix that? And let's also first start off with addressing this issue, which is that it's choppy. So for this, for this, we're going to start out with pardon. I'm trying to figure out what we're going to do in here. Okay, yeah, I collected my bearings. So we got two problems. We got this choppiness, and then we also got this fact that we aren't getting any large scale or small scale micro details on there. Like everything that we're getting is from the cloud texture itself. Like it's not. Like this looks like it's volumetric data, but it's not really. It's just from the texture. It's showing how good the texture is. Oops. Looks pretty fire, but we're also not getting the fully accurate results that we want. So what we're going to do here is we are going to augment this section right here to be a bit more adaptive. And the way we're going to do that is instead of taking these constant stepped lengths or constant length steps, we're going to make them start out small so we can assess the surroundings of these clouds. Then we're going to make them bigger and bigger as we go out until we eventually hit the atmosphere. We're going to use a polynomial function for this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this counter thing here and we're going to subtract add in an add node, subtract this, subtract counter plus 0.125, subtract counter from counter plus 0.125. And then we're going to add this special little thing on that. So like we could plug this right into there. Add this special little thing, and that is a power node. Oh, why is it freezing up? There we go. And we're going to tie this to a value. And this value is going to be, I like to set it around 4. You get these beautiful streaks, and most importantly, you get very high frequency details from this. Like the volume computation is superb. Like, let's go and adjust the cloud density. Actually, cloud thickness as well. Maybe 0.025. If we adjust the density function, this is serving as our like impromptu cloud density, and increase that like tenfold. Oh. Something weird's happening there. There we go. Now we can see it. Yeah, we see like this, we get this very fine volume detail. So let's modulate this into an actual cloud layer. And I'm going to append another function for this, and I'm just going to show you it, and you can copy it on by yourself. Let's grab, where is it? It's cloud layer. Cloud layer, converter, math, sorry, we don't need this. We need so this cloud layer function. Before you really take a look at this, let me sharpen this up a little bit. What was I going to do? Okay, these ones don't really matter too much. Just this first value. So this takes in an H. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to use this. That's just too, it's weird. It's not even very well designed. I just sort of know how to use it because I've been using it. So what we're going to do is we need to normalize a value between the start, or we need to figure out how high up in the cloud layer we actually are. And we're going to do that by using the same sort of thing we did right here. So we're going to converter, vector math, length, and then converter, math, subtract 1, right? And then divide by the atmosphere thickness, because remember it's all relative to that. Atmosphere thickness, where is that? There it is. And then additionally we need to subtract the atmosphere height, or sorry, cloud height. cloud height. That's a divide, we need to subtract. And then divide by cloud thickness. And that's going to give us basically a normalized scale between 0 and 1, depending on how high up in the cloud layer we are. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to, we want to use this cloud texture as basically a height map for, it's basically a height map for the clouds. So what we're going to do is we're going to subtract this from that. I believe, yes, and then converter, color ramp. We just need to make sure it's not, we just need to make sure that it's not going to return negative value. And then we need to make sure, since we're getting all these weird things, we need to make sure that this is going to multiply by, actually, sorry, we don't need that. We just need to do maximum between this and 0. That basically prevents us from having any lower. It prevents us from having this lower than 0. That's what I'm trying to say. And let's pardon. So we're still getting this error, and that's mainly because we have these, I forgot to add in, this should be a little bit above that, I believe. Actually, no, just change the scale here a little bit. That basically gets rid of it for the most part. What the hell? Pardon. Oh yeah, I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. Oh, I'm silly. So, what I generally do with clouds is I use a different color value from them. Oh, I'm going to name... So we have the regular color for the atmosphere, and then I'm also going to use... this is going to be the cloud color. And that's what I'm going to be using for this. That should get rid of most of it, and then theoretically oh, that's why I'm stupid. Okay. Give me 1 second. I am incredibly bad at explaining this. Okay, so instead of using that, we can use a multiply here, and then a greater than 0. That basically just cuts off all the values where h is below 0. And then boom, clouds. Clouds. And I generally set this like 1.1 or something. You can see these very, very high detail clouds that look, quite frankly, I think quite amazing. So we also need to so we have extinction here. Let's also add in a cloud extinction, and we can literally just add in this right here, and that's going to be the extinction. And this extinction is what we're going to plug into this right here in the cloud layer. And what we can do with the so actually we aren't going to add in the clouds to the color, just to the extinction, because they don't affect the atmosphere's color, just the light that is passed through them. Let's, there we go. So there we go, we got a couple clouds. So I'm going to multiply this by 1,000, and then I'm going to add in a value, a parameter for cloud density. I'm going to call this not control H, control G, cloud density. Set this to like 5. And boom, clouds. And one thing we might want to do is make sure we are adding in some making sure that the clouds are bright enough so we can use a converter. Actually, I'm going to delete this cloud color thing and just duplicate this. Color. I'm just going to delete this entirely and use this instead. Oh, not an atmosphere, in clouds. Because we want to make sure our clouds are able to have color, so I'm going to add in a cloud color. So RGB, Control G, cloud color, and converter, vector math, multiply. Where is multiply? I am stupid. Multiply. And then multiply this. Actually, I'm going to scale this by another value. That's going to be called cloud irradiance. So Control G is going to be cloud irradiance. Basically just how bright the clouds are. So maybe I want this to be 3. And that's a bit more cloud-like. And let's actually alter this so that we can see a bit more better how these clouds actually look. And we can see just how much detail is embedded in these clouds. It's quite frankly amazing. I'm gonna push this right here just to see how this looks. That's quite silly. So I'm going to merge this into a node group basically, and we're going to use, this is going to be the texture input, this is going to be the height input. So let's grab this. Actually, just all of this. So we're going to grab this. I'm going to call this just cloud layer. So the first value I'm going to use here is going to be the texture input. This is going to be the height input. This output here is going to be, actually, let's first loading large textures takes time. So this right here, that's going to be the edge sharpness. There we go. And then this right here is going to be the density. And that's pretty much it. Actually, let me configure the output. So this is going to be the density. And then I'm going to multiply this by an anisotropy, right? Because clouds have anisotropy. But I'm going to do something pretty fun here. And that is, I'm going to use color mix RGB. Actually, I'm going to mix between, I'm going to call this color extinction. So I'm going to use a color mix RGB. This is a derivation of the same method I use in the cloud tutorial I have on my channel. It's using the anisotropy variation. Actually, let's, instead of doing this, let's just connect this and just call this anisotropy. No need to do this in the node group. So I'm going to mix between the anisotropy value and 0 based on the converter math. Divide. There we go. Divide by this, and then add that. Basically what this does is it makes the, what am I trying to say? It normalizes the value between 0 and 1, or it condenses the values between 0 and 1. That's going to make combining this a little bit easier. So let's multiply by the density here, because we need to factor that in. And then we use that for the cloud color. We're going to scale that by an anisotropy. Actually, we can do the anisotropy in here. Oh, sorry. Where is anisotropy? Literally the first one. So we could scale that by the anisotropy vector. Let's zoom in on this. Let's actually kill the atmosphere for a second. So that's quite a bit of anisotropy. So let's change the density up a bit. So that's a bit curious. One thing I might add here, I'm going to connect this here to, I'm going to call this indirect light amount. Let's see, like if we go to crazy amounts, like, seems like it stabilizes around there, but that's way too much of that. So let's change this down to like 0.1, because we don't really need that much. Then we can change this density up to like 5, and power. What's going on here? Pardon. I'm just trying to figure this stuff out. I'm trying to figure out where I messed up here. This is kind of hard if you can't already understand. Hmm. Huh. That is frustrating. I do not really know what's going on there as of right now. I'm going to take a minute to think about this. So what could be going wrong here? It's kind of fun. Let's choose cubic. Huh. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. We need some subdivision. So let's go into, let's change this up to 2. Let's apply that. And just make sure these are exactly 1. There. Solid. Yeah, pardon that. Okay, something's clearly going on with this, and that's kind of frustrating. Let's try something. Oh, I screwed up on this. That might solve it. Add sharpness, let's change this to like 10. Nope, still not working. What's happening is it's clipping, and I'm not entirely sure why. Is it a problem with the displacement? I hope not. Either way, that seems to solve it. Interesting. Very, very interesting. It's stuff like this that really makes you question your sanity. So let's move over here. Actually, let's turn on the atmosphere as well and let's see how this works. I'm gonna change my music. So you can see it's pretty fast and it's actually pretty noiseless, which is really nice. Fortunately, the time per sample is pretty low, but it's pretty high, but you don't need many samples. So let's add in a bit more thickness. And these clouds look marvelous, don't they? So what we have going here, I believe we do, actually no we don't, is we have some anisotropy. And I'm going to change this to 0.5. Then what I like to do is I like to use these textures as both textures and density input. So we can multiply this by like 0.5. Oops, no, I screwed up a non-screw up. So let's fix this. There you go. That's better. And then what I also like to do is I like to add in some noise enhancement to our cloud here. And I'm going to call this one, instead of extinction, I'm going to call this density. So let's control G that, and then we can call this cloud density map. Just a way to sort of localize it. And you can actually stack these layers as well. It's kind of interesting. So let's convert our vector math, add, say, texture, noise texture. And maybe set this like 3300, 0.75, and like 8. Add, subtract. 0.5. And then let's convert our vector math scale 0.001. Or actually more like 0.0005. Like it really enhances that detail, eh? But so let's do a render with this. Like these are some pretty neat clouds, and what I'm going to show you next, like the last part of this tutorial, I think will be how to improve the shadows. Let's actually decrease the cloud thickness because we don't need that much. Let's turn off atmosphere. No, I don't want atmosphere on. Stay off. So let's set up our camera somewhere around here. Let's set our samples to 15. All right. Anyways, I said I was gonna show you guys something, how to increase the sort of shadow casting. So the way we can do that is we can multiply converter, vector math, multiply. We can use the RSIF function. Converter, where's RSIF? Shoot. So we can use the RSIF function. So group RSIF. This is going to be position, direction, and the radius will be decided by the cloud height. So where is, okay, I guess we'll have to, so we need cloud height and atmosphere thickness, and then we're going to multiply those two again just to get the sort of cloud height. Multiply, and then obviously add 1 because we need the radius of the planet. Okay, so there we go. Then we're going to use the vec far, and we're going to plug in the group cloud density function. Where is it? Cloud density map. So this is going to be the vec close, and the height input is going to, or sorry, the vec far is what we need, and then the height input is going to be the height input is going to be 0. And then we're going to use converter, sorry, not converter vector math, converter math, and power, power 0.5, and that's, use a multiply node here. I'd like to change like 0.1 or something. We don't need, well, we'll experiment with it later. And then this is what we're going to be multiplying it by. And we also have to color, color, mix RGB, mix between this and a white value by testing whether or not the altitude is greater than the start of the cloud layer. So that's going to be if converter, converter, no, converter math greater than this, and then the vector math length of the position. Actually, sorry, other way around. There we go. And theoretically, that should do it. Oh, I forgot to add the atmosphere in. I'm going to not do the cloud layer in the viewport because it's just really slow and I don't need that. So update images. Let's see if this works. That is curious. Huh. I'm currently wondering why that's not working properly. Oh, that's why. I'm in the wrong material. Silly. Alrighty. Let's... Oh, wrong one. Let's go into here. Let's figure out what's going on here. Okay. All right, so it looks like that's working. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. Scale. There we go. I think that should work. If it doesn't, I'd be surprised. Huh. Fun. So that's not working. Always good to know. Hmm. 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 Yeah, it's gonna be about 5 minutes of me just going, hmm. This is quite frustrating though. Oof. Let's try starting by making this quite significantly larger. Okay, what's going on there? What's going on there? That is really weird. That is really, really weird. Huh. Okay. I don't want to leave this on a dead end. This is quite puzzling. I'm not sure what's going on here. Maybe this is actually it. Maybe. Yeah, this seems like it working. That makes more sense. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Good, good, good. Let's make this a little bit better. Like we don't need that much. That's probably sufficient. And let's do a quick render. I'm legitimately curious to see if this turns out well. And then when you do a final render, you can enable the ground material again. I'm not going to do that because it does slow it down a little bit. This is kind of just a rough sort of sketch of what your planet could look like. But if I'm going to say so myself, this is one of the better results I think that we could have gotten. Takes a lot of tweaking of parameters, and certainly it's definitely frustrating. And this has been a quite terribly complicated tutorial, and that's why I included the little bit of the more simple beginner tutorial at the beginning. But yeah, this is looking good. And like it's been a minute literally, and this is a passable result, right? It's quite crazy. I'm gonna make the cloud layer a little bit thicker. So let's add in a bit more. Let's add in the haze. haze brightness, haze color, haze density, and I'm gonna use my very special SAS planet generated desert map. And let's go into downloads. That's where I have it. Great file storage. Great file sorting storage system, of course. Where is it? Stitch one, stitch one, stitch one. I just recently used it, so I think it should be up here. Shoot. Alright, I guess I just wasted some time and whatever. Stitch. Stitch one, stitch one, stitch one. Where is it? Stitch one. There we go. So give it a second to update the images, of course. And in viewport, you might want to change this up to like 1 or something. That way you can get a little bit better results. I'm going to turn off the displacement and obviously no specular. Turn roughness up. Let's manipulate the UVs a bit. Let's go with that. Let's do a quick render. Yeah, so this is, I believe this would be the end of the tutorial. Just gonna let this render for a second. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed, please do subscribe if you feel like that might be useful to you. I make tutorials every once in a while. I have a Discord server, and definitely check that out. It's getting reasonably active the more I post on it. Got almost 1,000 members, and if you've stuck to the end, you're a real trooper. It's kind of a crazy tutorial. I got Patreon, YouTube, ArtStation, all that sort of thing, Instagram. So I'll see you guys sometime soon. Hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good one. Alright, that's after one sample. It's about 1 minute in. Quite impressive, I think. Have a good one.